Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I am your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we're going to preview the women's indoor track and field team in advance of their big star meet coming up against Army on February 5th. I'll give you a quick rundown on how a typical dual meet is scored, and then I'll be joined by a former member of the team to profile 5 athletes who figure to play a key role when the Mids take on the Black Knights. So, if you are a track junkie like me, great. If not, stick around anyway because we're going to have a lot of fun. Okay, we are back, and we've really got a good show lined up for you today, so whether you are a regular listener or you're hearing us for the first time, thanks for making us part of your day. Now, as I just mentioned in the opening, the Navy Women's Indoor Track and Field team has their star meet versus Army coming up next week. Of course, the men do too, but in this episode, we're going to focus primarily on the women since our guests used to compete on that team. When the outdoor track season rolls around in the spring, we'll check out the men's team. Anyway, I do want to get to our guests as soon as we can, so I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and put off the sports update until the next episode. What I want to do now is give you guys a quick rundown on how these dual meets in indoor track are actually scored. Then we can see where both teams stand as of right now before we start taking a look at our athletes. Okay, first let's start with the total number of events. In a dual meet, typically there are a total of 17 events. 11 are on the track, and then there are 6 field events. And I'm not going to give you the whole laundry list. We'll kind of cover them as we go along, but that just kind of level sets everybody. And as far as the points go, there are points assigned for the first 4 places. So we start with 5 points for first place, 3 for second, 2 for third, and 1 for fourth. Now, there are a couple of minor exceptions when it comes to scoring, but again, that's a story for another time, so I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. For our purposes, the format I just laid out is how it works most of the time. Anyway, as you can see from that, having solid depth across as many events as possible is a real bonus. If a team doesn't finish first in an event, the impact of that loss can be softened by taking any 2 of the next 3 spots. It can be a pretty effective strategy. In fact, it played a big role in last year's star meet that the Mids won 98-83. Going into this year's matchup, it looks like both teams have competed about the same number of times. Most of them have been in invitationals. The fact is that actually the dual meets are becoming less common at the collegiate level, and that's a subject for another day, but it's actually pretty interesting. I started learning a little bit more about that as I was getting ready for this episode. In any case, the women's team is pretty strong, starting with about the 400 and working all the way up into the middle distances. When I looked at the 2 most recent invitationals for both teams, the Mids had significantly better times in the 400 meters, the 800, the 1,000, the mile, and the 3,000 meters. So I think we can expect some pretty good things there. These meets are usually pretty close. The Mids won the last 2 to pull even in the overall series. Right now, both Army and Navy have won 17 times with 1 tie. Now, outdoors, Navy does have a 20-14 advantage. As a final tune-up, the women will be competing in the Patriot Games this weekend at George Mason University. And on the back end of this episode, I'll also kind of touch on some of the results that they had from the Wesley A. Brown Invitational from last week. So that should get you pretty much up to speed on where things sit with Navy women's indoor track right now. We're going to step away real fast, but when we come back, we'll meet our guest and continue with our preview of the team. Don't go anywhere. All right, it is time for our deep dive segment, so let's go ahead and introduce our guest. She is originally from North Brunswick, New Jersey, and she majored in systems engineering while graduating with merit, which, by the way, is no small feat. While at the academy, she earned 3 letters in cross country, 2 in indoor track, and 1 in outdoor track. And during her senior year, she served as 11th Company Commander. And finally, she was inducted into the Navy Athletics Hall of Fame in women's track as part of the 4x800 meter relay team that won the national championship. Her teammates on that team were Sue Honan from the class of 84, Stephanie Green from 85, and Laura Hinckley from the class of 83. These days, she's heavily involved in mentoring programs through Mentors Incorporated, and she gives talks to young girls, encouraging them to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. So I'm very pleased to welcome my classmate from the class of 84, Chris Gromick, to the podcast. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on Navy Sports Central. We really appreciate you being here with us today.
Oh, Carl, thanks for having me.
All right. So, one of the things I like to do, especially when I have classmates on, is to basically find out their whole story in terms of how they wound up at the academy. So I was wondering if you could kind of share that with the folks who are listening. When did you first hear about the academy, and when did you decide that that's where you wanted to go?
Well, I first heard about it when my dad, in 1976, so my dad was reading about the first women being admitted to the academy for plebe summer. And he's like, oh, Chris, look, they let women into the academy. And I'm like, oh, God, who would ever want to do that? And the sly dog that he is, he's like, oh, okay, well, whatever. And then the summer after my freshman year in high school, he says, oh, let's take a family trip to Washington, D.C. So I grew up in New Jersey. So we drive down there, and he's like, oh, on the way back, let's stop in Annapolis. So we stop in Annapolis, and it's class of 81's plebe summer. And the campus, you don't have to tell you or anybody else who's ever been there. It's like one of the most beautiful campuses. I still think that. I thought the minute I walked on, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then I'm watching all the plebes run around and scream and shout and formation. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And I'm like, looks kind of fun. And I'm like, how dumb. How dumb could you be? And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should think about this more. And I'm like, well, I'm one of 5 kids. And I'm like, oh, geez, this is free college, Dad. Dad keeps telling me free college. So from that point on, I was like kind of interested. And that's pretty much how I ended up there.
All right. That's pretty good. So thinking back to high school now, you obviously ran track. What other sports did you play besides that? And did you think about playing those when you got to Navy?
You know what? I was just a runner in high school. Like I dabbled in middle school and basketball and softball, but I was like kind of a klutz. And so I just stuck with running the whole time I was in high school. So I did three seasons of running. Okay.
All right. Now, it sounds like your dad, obviously was doing his best to kind of point you in that direction of the academy. Was he the main one that influenced you to go, or was there anybody else who kind of played a role in that?
My dad was a big influence. A really good friend of mine in high school, her brother, when I was a freshman, he was a senior, and he was applying to Navy. He turned out to be class of 81, Kenny Wadelick, and he was actually in 10th Company, and I was in 11th Company when I eventually got there. But I was kind of following him along, and he'd come back over, breaks, and Patty and I would, hang out, and he'd be there and talk about it. And, it sounded like the place to be. But, my dad just kept, bringing it up every once in a while and just not really pushing me in the direction, but, encouraging me to look more closely at it.
Right. Okay. All right. So, and I'm asking this question just to kind of give everybody some perspective, because obviously when you were getting there, I mean, our class was the 5th one that had women in it. And I believe that when we graduated, I'm going to say we probably graduated maybe, was it 70 or 80 or am I off base on that?
Oh, no. We graduated in the 40s.
Okay. All right. So it's even lower than that. So just for fun, as I was getting ready for this, I actually counted up the number of athletes on the women's roster on the track team. Came up with 75. Across all 4 classes. Okay. So when you think back to when you were competing then, how did those numbers square? I mean, how does it compare to when you were on the team? How many teammates did you have?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if there were 75, assuming there were 100 women in each class, which as we progressed, obviously both men and women, leave the academy for one reason or another. That would be 25% of women would have to be, of each class would have to be on the team. So no, we did not have 75. I mean, I just remember sitting in the big milk carton buses and everyone had their own seat,
right.
So there couldn't have been, if we had 30, I would say we probably had a lot because everyone did more than one event.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't be a big squad. We couldn't be 75. There's just
right.
There would just weren't enough women. Like I remember, we couldn't even field teams to be, we were Division III in the, not even NCAA, we were the AIAW at the time. So, but we were considered Division III. And I remember a big argument at one point where they kept trying to push us at that point into a Division I track and field because we were under scholarship. We were all scholarship athletes. And we're like, well, we're scholarship athletes, but not because we're great runners. Or, we eventually, as they, admitted more women, we obviously moved up the ranks into NCAA and Division I. But at the time, there wasn't enough. And like I said, if we had 30, we probably had a lot.
Yeah. And you make a good point, too, in terms of the athletes there participating in more than one sport, because clearly, I can't remember how many sports there were that came out total right away. Certainly not at the Division III level. Some of them were like club sports, like, when Ginger was talking about cross country earlier. But I asked that question basically to kind of demonstrate how much growth there has been in those sports over the last, 30, 40 years or so, because now you've got a total of 13 varsity sports where the women compete. 3 of them are co-ed, and the other 10 are in the Patriot League. And as of last spring, when the golf team won the Patriot League title, all 10 of those teams have won at least one league championship.
Wow.
Since its inception. So that to me is pretty cool to see. All right, let's go ahead and move on here. I'm going to basically, we've talked a little bit about what the events that you ran and stuff like that. Oh, there's one question. It's kind of out of place here perhaps, but I'm going to ask it here before I forget. Running indoors, I don't know. I know we didn't have such a track at the Halsey Fieldhouse when we were there, but did you ever run on a track that was banked when you were competing?
I did once or twice, but it wasn't indoors, to believe it or not. It was an outdoor wooden track. And I was in high school, and I believe, I lived right near Rutgers University, so I'm pretty sure that's where it was, but somewhere over there. And it was a winter track. We weren't indoor track. We were winter track because there were not very many indoor tracks. And it was a wooden banked track. So that was, it's interesting because it's funny how you have to line up, because you can't really line up on the bank. You have to, it's really more for the sprints. I believe it was, I don't even think it was 220. I believe it was smaller. I want to say it was, I think you had to do like 3 times around for a quarter mile. So it was just like an odd distance.
Yeah, like 150 or something like that.
Yeah.
I know most of them these days are like 200 meters, but yeah, they could be shorter for sure. It all depends on how much space they have available when they constructed the track, I think.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, I was just kind of curious about that. All right, so thanks for that quick intro in terms of your background and such. What I wanted to do now is kind of jump into, I basically picked out 5 athletes that I want to kind of discuss. And some of them are field athletes, some of them are mid-distance, some of them are sprint. But I wanted to just kind of, touch on your expertise and those of your classmates that you knew or other teammates that you knew when you were there in terms of just kind of giving your perspective on some of these different events. So the first athlete I want to talk about is Charlene Mork. She is a junior from Isanti, Minnesota, and she specializes in the pole vault. Now, she won the Patriot League Championship in 2020, and she also finished first at last year's Star Meet versus Army. And I think I read where she's only one of 3 women at the academy who've cleared 4 meters. So I would ask if you had any classmates who competed in that event, but I know that the NCAA didn't even add it until 1998. But, let's suppose they did, all right? Is this an event that you would ever consider trying? And based on your athletic experience, what do you think goes into being, a decent pole vaulter?
I don't think I would have tried it. I always found it fascinating to watch, especially watching the men, in the Olympics and stuff, Bob Seagram, and I can't think of some other ones, but I just remember him specifically. And so I don't think I would have I don't think I'd have the coordination, but I think it's a really big combination of power it's converting the run down the ramp to planting the pole and converting the speed into, height or power to get up. And you're converting the speed to propel yourself up and upwards and actually upside down, So, but really, if you talk to any pole vaulters, it's a lot mental. I mean, it could get kind of, you're the lower heights, it's not so much. I mean, I was a high jumper, so, you really literally start out fairly not too much higher than some of these Olympic high jumpers. But it's just when you start getting up to the height, you have to overcome that fear of doing it. It's just like a gymnast who has to do all those tumblings. Like if you ever seen Simone Biles, you look at her and you're like, oh my gosh, they're running down that ramp and they're hitting that vault and they're spinning, and they have to have, a spatial awareness to make sure they know where their body is, because it's dangerous if you lose your spatial recognition of where your body is. Learning pole vaulters wear helmets now because they're concerned about how they fall, or some don't even hit the mat, depending on how fast they run down the runway. But I really admire people who could do that. It's not an easy sport. It is an event. It's something that it takes a lot of mental and physical coordination.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I couldn't have done it either. And when I think about something like the pole vault, I think about when we were going through flight school. Remember when we had to do that precision and aerobatic stage? think back in the recesses of your memory.
How many times I threw up?
But I remember when we had to when we were getting introduced to the barrel roll. Okay. And, the instructor demonstrated it for me on the very first one and everything. He goes, okay, Carl, now you do it. So, when he did it, it was just like so smooth and everything. And I was kind of following what was going on. But when he was like trying to talk me through, I really had no idea what I was doing, right? I mean, you could study the procedures all you want. It just, when you get in there in the cockpit and you're doing this stuff, it's like, okay, this is not matching up with what I recall, I should be seeing. So the first time he let me do it on my own, oh my God, about halfway through, he just took the controls and, corrected me and everything like that. And I read the grade sheet afterwards, and it said, barrel roll below average. And he said, pulled 2.5 G's in a barrel roll. and we're laughing, of course, because we know that a barrel roll is only a 1G maneuver. So luckily, I was able to kind of figure that out by the time I finished up the syllabus, and I was actually able to do it, on a satisfactory level before moving on. But that right there convinced me that I wasn't going to be a jet pilot. Okay, I was very happy to be a helicopter pilot, and that was my thing. So, but when I think about pole vaulting, the fact that you're running down the runway, so you're facing straight ahead, and then you plant the pole, and then all of a sudden you're looking straight up. And then you're approaching the bar and you have to twist. So now you're looking back behind you. And then you drop the pole and you're like looking so you can clear the bar. So now you're looking down. And then you got to flip back up and now you're looking up again as you land into the pit. There's no way I could have managed that. I would have probably killed myself, So.
Like I said, I mean, it's almost a gymnast with a pole in some ways.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. The next athlete we got here is Jessica Nangle, and she is from Southampton, Pennsylvania, a senior, and she competes in distance races, both indoors and outdoors. Typically runs a 3,000 in the wintertime, and I think she runs the steeplechase outside. But she was also the captain of the women's cross country team this past fall. Now, both the men and the women just finished up a dual meet against Princeton. The women weren't able to come away with the win, but Nangle did win the 3,000 meters with a time of about 9 minutes, 40 seconds. And her time was actually good enough to qualify for regionals, so she's in pretty good shape. Now, I remember from the conversation I had with Ginger a few months back that you also ran cross country in the fall, okay? And I'm kind of curious, just based on the events that you took part in during the winter and the spring seasons, how did running cross country benefit you beyond just conditioning, and kind of getting you ready for the winter season?
Well, conditioning is primary, but in cross country, as Ginger mentioned, that you just don't do long distance. It's not just, okay, I could run. It's not marathon training. It's, so there's speed workout in there and tempo runs and all that stuff. So that helps because in the middle distance races, it's quick twitch muscles, not as fast as the sprints, but you can't just be in this, okay, I'm going to do long, slow distance. It's a quicker pace. So if you just did long distance running for conditioning, that doesn't help you. I mean, it gives you overall fitness perhaps like now, but yeah, it doesn't help you speed wise. So the fact that cross country isn't just long, slow distance, you start getting into race pace stuff, quicker sprints to get your body acclimated or your muscles acclimated to feeling a little bit the lactic acid buildup and stuff. So, and then also the part of it is, the actual race itself, you don't run by yourself in any race. And so, there's the jostling, or how do you feed off of someone else's momentum or not? Or are you demoralized when someone passes you? It's a mental thing. So it really helps you to get into the frame of mind of racing also, because, again, I could run 3 or 4 miles now and, whatever. But when you're in a racing situation, there's just so much more. The anticipation, the adrenaline buildup beforehand, the butterflies until you're on the line and the gun goes off. I mean, so even though cross country is a longer race than I would normally run, it still gets you mentally and physically ready to do the shorter distance. Because in the 400, or especially the 800, 400 you run in a lane, but the 800 it's a kind of a gang start, or at some point you cut in and it's all that jostling. And I don't know if you saw the Olympics, but in the men's 800, oh gosh, what was his name, from great young middle distance runner, and he usually runs out front, big, obviously, Olympic meet, and he clipped an opponent. He got tangled up in the final stretch. I remember that. And he fell. And, not to say that, it was, well, they ultimately ruled it his fault. He was very gracious, but he, it's just, if you're not used to that bunching of, people, if you're always in the lead or always behind, you're never going to be, people get tangled up all the time. It happens more than you actually know. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that anybody who's used to running out front like that, all of a sudden it's a completely different dynamic if they get caught up in the pack and they don't know how to react and stuff like that. So yeah, I see what you're saying there. Okay, next up is Ellie Abraham. She is a sophomore from Brookings, South Dakota, and looks like she runs some of the events that you did when you were there, at least one of them anyway. She also ran cross country and did really, really well, as a matter of fact. But most recently, she placed third in the 1,000 meters against Princeton, and her time of just under 3 minutes also qualified her for regionals. Now, the one thing I've always found interesting about middle distance races is they have elements of both a sprint and a distance race. So I was wondering if you can kind of speak to that a little bit when it comes to things like race strategy, preparing, all that sort of thing, and actually what's going through your head as you are running, say, an 800-meter race. Well, first of all, the 400 is just a long sprint.
Right.
I don't care what anyone says. They start in the blocks and they stay in their lanes just like any other sprint. And so that's pretty much a sprint. Obviously not as fast as a 100, but it's still a sprint. Now the 800, yes, it's that one. The big thing is you don't want to go out slow and you don't want to go out fast. A lot of the big meets have pacers.
Right.
And, to try and keep people, I don't know, if they want, it's like anything. If they want to set a record or they just want to keep a pace, and that person will only run upwards of a quarter mile, 1 lap out of the 2 lap race. And then you'll notice they'll drop out. Some only do, like 200, half the lap. But the key is not to go out too fast where you just die at the end. So you really try and do even paced or actually a negative split. So to make your second half of the race faster than your first. And we're not talking like very much, but 1 or 2 seconds, and that's a lot. 2 seconds is huge but you try and keep it as even pace as possible, but you definitely want to make sure the ideally would be, like I said, a negative split. So your second lap, final lap, is faster than your first.
Now, was that what you found particularly challenging about running those races, is trying to get those negative splits, or were there other things that kind of came into play there?
I don't know if it was the challenge of, it's always a challenge to keep it as fairly even paced, whatever your distance is, half mile, 1,000. I never ran 1,000. They didn't have that event, but, or a mile. But for me, I just tried to stay as close to the lead as possible. I was the lead-off leg of the 4x8 because I just needed the one-on-one, head-to-head competition of the first leg. Whereas, by the second leg, or definitely the third leg, the teams are always spread out. And I just needed like someone there going, okay, they're right here. They're right next to me. They're coming up on me. I hear them, or I got to stay in front of them, or I have to catch the person in front of me. So I personally just, I wasn't a front runner per se. I just tried to, just stay and hope my last sprint might take me faster than whoever was nearest to me. You know what I'm saying?
For sure. Okay, now we're up to Molly Mangan. She is a junior from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she enters her third year as one of Navy's most accomplished sprinters so far. I mean, she's done quite a bit in the first couple of years. She can cover any distance from 60 meters all the way up to 400, and she's also runs the 4x400 meter relay. Molly is the defending Patriot League champion at both 60 and 200 meters indoors, and she also won both of those events against Army last year. So one of the things that, I don't get a chance to see a lot of video on the track athletes just because, they, except for maybe the Patriot League championships, they're not going to carry them on ESPN Plus or anything like that. So what I ended up seeing is just a lot of highlights that Navy Athletics has, right? But I do note that she covers a wide range, like I'd mentioned, and obviously you're a multi-event athlete, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But I'm kind of curious if you knew anybody, if you had a teammate back then who did run several of the sprints, and what their approach was for making sure they just didn't run out of gas at the very end.
Yes, pretty much everyone did more than one event because we just didn't have a big team. And the sprinters it's normal. I mean, if you've ever, Usain Bolt, all the big sprinters usually run the multi sprints. And while in the bigger meets, they might be a little bit more spread out. So if you've noticed in the Olympic trials or whatever, 100, I'm not to say that you're not spent at the end of, 11 seconds or 12 seconds, but it's not like running 2 marathons or anything. So, or even the 5,000 and 10,000 meters outdoors. But so, pretty much they go all out, but like the longer sprints, the 200, they kind of try and pace it. It depends on how many heats they're going to have. Uh-huh. If they, like in a dual meet, they won't have, chances are they won't have multiple heats. So you're pretty much putting all out all the time because they should be spreading out you're not doing it's not like a meet doesn't run 100, 200, 400, 800. They have, the 100 and then they maybe go to the mile or then they'll do some other sprints or they'll do something else and how they splice it out because they know the athletes are multi-event people. So they try and give them enough recovery time to, cool down, stretch, warm back up and recuperate. So in a dual meet, it'll be spaced out, but they'll go all out for every event. And chances are, if they do the 100 and the 200, they're not also doing the 400.
Right. Okay.
So usually you take to the shorter sprints, and the 400 was kind of a group unto themselves, because that one is really hard to come back from and do another event. So usually, the quick sprinters, 100, 200, they pretty much go all out. And if there's multiple heats of, say, the 400, they'll pace it so they know they'll make it to the next round, but they won't. Chances are they're not going for any kind of PR or anything at that point. In the final, they will, or if there's only one heat, or it's just the final in a dual meet. Like I said, there's probably not too many runners, and they'll just go all out. But a 400, they'll do one, and they'll probably do the relay at the end. But they won't be they won't be running too much other of the events. But the sprints is pretty much all out at our level, at the college level. Now, as you get into the NCAAs or the conference championships, and there's more heats, and there's a little bit more, I wouldn't say pacing, but you have to gauge where you are and adjust accordingly.
Right. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay, so now our last athlete we want to talk about is Katie Halbert, and she is a senior from Keller, Texas, and she is a multi-event athlete. So she's going to be the one doing the pentathlons indoors and the heptathlons outdoors. In fact, she's the defending Patriot League champion in the heptathlon from last year. So in the Princeton meet, which is the first duel that the team has had this year, she finished second in the 60 meters. And now the one thing I didn't see is any kind of pentathlon results for that meet. I don't know if they just have those at invitationals or if they have them at duels, or what's the typical practice there? I'm not sure if things have changed over the years or what.
They don't normally do those in dual meets. It's more of like a regional or invitational, conference championships, Eastern regionals, NCAAs. It's just there's just not enough time.
Right.
And but it allows the athlete who would normally do that to do the different events, a chance to just specialize in that particular meet, or try. They probably end up doing as many, maybe not all those events, but maybe they'll just do the field events this meet, or maybe they'll run something and then do something else. So it's not like they're not preparing for the big meet. It's just not something that they do in dual meets very often.
Okay. All right. So now, because you're just doing such a wide variety of events here, I'm really interested in the whole, pacing and that sort of thing as it relates to this, because obviously here you're talking about the winner achieving a certain number of points, right? And I don't understand how those points are calculated from one event to the other. I don't know if it takes a whole lot to explain that, but I'm a little bit curious about it. But from a strategy standpoint, think back to maybe one of the times that you competed at one of these invitationals indoors and you're running the pentathlon, or you can even look at outdoors if you want to as well, just to bring up an example. But okay, the schedule for the day, which events are your strongest. Talk to me a little bit about if you set a goal for that particular meet, I want to get X number of points, right? Or am I even thinking down the right road here? I'm kind of curious to understand from a multi-event athlete what the planning is like and what the execution looks like.
Well, the point schedule, there's some kind of chart, and it's based on, I guess, I want to say the difficulty of the event. Me personally, I just went and tried to do my best in each one, because whatever came out. It's kind of weird if you watch it, because they could beat you in the hurdles, but you could do a better long jump, and then you'll be ahead. The points are kind of weird, and they'll beat you. They can beat you every single time, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win the pentathlon. That's always the weird thing. So I always just went to try and do the best I could in each event, and however it came out. So because I wasn't at the level where, I could go, okay, I'm going to get more points if I do better in the shot put than if I did here. I just the shot put was one of it. I'm going to do the best I can, and whatever comes out, comes out.
Okay.
That's me. I did better in the running events, although the hurdles were just impossible for me. That was probably my worst event. I held my own in the shot put, and of course I was a high jumper and a long jumper, so I did okay. And then the 800 meters was just my event, so I usually made up most of my points in the last event of the meet. But that's what I did. I just couldn't sit there and calculate. And I don't think the coaches did. They just said, go out and do your best, and whatever happens, happens.
Okay. All right.
I wasn't at the level to fine tune anything. I didn't have time to really learn. I put hours into the hurdles, but I just couldn't get it.
Right. Right.
And it goes back to like the pole vault. It was the fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because you actually have to take off to hurdle about 3 feet prior to the hurdle. But that 3 feet might as well be, 10 feet or whatever in your mind. If you're not, and it's nothing that you can't hit the hurdle or have it fall, but if you hit it, you could fall or it could hurt.
Right.
And it does. So, and it's a speed across, and if you don't trust yourself to be able to, take the leap over the hurdle that far in front of the hurdle, what you need to, you end up stutter stepping, and then you're just slow.
Right.
And I, every once in a while I would do it, and then I'm like, oh, great, I got it. And then the next day I would be like, oh, I'm afraid to hit the hurdle again.
Right. Right.
So a lot of it is, like I said, for me, it was always, let's just do the best I can, do the best I can in the events that I know I'm really better at, and then just hang on and see what happens. So, I didn't do, I don't know how many I actually did pentathlons, but I was fortunate to, in the Eastern regionals, I got third.
Oh, okay.
I forget, it was up in Bowdoin, Maine, but I forget who else was. I know Army was there, but I don't, I got third, which I thought was pretty darn good. So.
Right. Yeah. So, to your point, though, I think that there is something to be said for just keeping things simple, right? And instead of like overthinking it when it comes to, deciding, figuring out what you want to do for that particular event for that day. Yeah, so that makes total sense to me. Now, in fact, your response, actually kind of feeds into the next question I wanted to ask you in terms of how teams typically take the results from one meet and prepare for the next one. Like, for example, Coach Cook, when he was kind of giving his remarks on the Princeton meet, the men ended up winning just barely. They won by 4 or 5 points or something like that. And the women actually, after the first 3 events, they actually competed really, really hard, but it was those first 3 events that kind of got them. Now, he basically said this is essentially a quote from him. He goes, "We got done what we needed to get done. Now we have a plan moving forward, and we'll see how well we can execute it over the next couple of weeks." So my question is, just kind of thinking back to your experience, when it comes to taking the results from a meet and trying to get ready for the next one, is it as simple as you say, where we're just say, okay, everybody just shoot to do your best in your event, try to get a PR or whatever, or is it more involved than that when it comes to making sure that the whole team is prepared for their next opponent?
It's a little bit of both, but really at that point, so you have a benchmark now. And maybe you have a sprinter who's better in the 200 than the 100. So so you take the results from this Princeton meet and you say, ooh, well, this runner did better in this event. So and then you go, well, maybe the 400 really isn't her event.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she would do better in the 800. And so then you maybe take the next week or however long it is till the next meet, and you work towards making her a better 800-meter runner. Or like I said, maybe the 200 is not good for a really quick short sprinter, and was too tired, or maybe the 200 went before the 100. I don't know. I don't remember the order of events. And you go, oh gosh, maybe they weren't ready for the next one. So maybe you just move. And then especially with the distance runners, you can move them around. You could be a good miler, but not a good 3,000-meter runner.
Right.
Or, you're a decent miler, and you had a good time, and you maybe even PR'd, but then maybe going, well, maybe we could translate that better into a better 3,000-meter runner. So you kind of, it's kind of like, it's not necessarily like basketball where you move people around, but you know what I'm saying? You move people to where they could do their best, and then ask them to do their best.
Right. That totally makes sense. Okay. Looks like that brings us to the last of the questions I wanted to go through as it relates to our athletes. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break here. And then when we come back, we'll visit with Chris some more and just jump into some lightning round questions. So stay with us. Okay, welcome back to Navy Sports Central. Carl Darden here with you, and my guest is Chris Gromick, who is my classmate from the class of '84 11th Company, and a former member of the Navy women's track team, both indoor and outdoor, and of course cross country. We mentioned that as well. So, Chris, thanks again for being with us. What I want to do now is just kind of give everybody a chance to kind of hear what you've been up to the last several years or so as it relates to your time after we left the academy. So, fire away.
Well, I did plebe detail right after graduation, and then I headed to Pensacola for flight school. I was lucky enough to get one of the few slots we had for women at the time, and I ended up being drafted into the E2C2 community. I actually wanted to be a helicopter pilot. It worked all out in the end, and I got winged in '86. Went to the RAG in Norfolk, where I went across the hangar to VRC 40, where I flew C2s for VRC 40 until my commitment was up in '91, right after the first Gulf War. I was fortunate enough to get hired by United, and I've been with United since May of '91. I started off as a DC-10 engineer. Then I went to be the first officer on a 737, flew that for a number of years. And then 2000, I flew as captain on the 727. At some point, I went to 737 captain. But ultimately, I just moved just a couple years ago. I moved from the right seat of the 757, and I'm now a captain on the 767, still in Washington, and I just finished 30 years with United Airlines. So that's my job in a nutshell, really, I guess.
Just out of curiosity, can you ballpark your number of flight hours?
Oh, gosh. I think when I put on my paperwork, probably close to 20,000 hours.
That's really, really impressive. That's pretty cool. All right. So what I want to do now is just kind of go through what we call our little lightning round segment. And I've got about 7 or so questions here for you. Just throw out the first thing that kind of comes to mind. If there's anything that begs for a follow-up question, I'll definitely ask that. But again, just a chance to have a little bit of fun and have everybody who's hearing this get to know you a little bit better. Okay. So here we go. When you were competing, the workout that you hated the most?
4 by 1 mile.
Okay.
4 by 1 mile was every Monday, and it was at the end of a 6N day.
Okay.
And then the worst part would be is if you actually had to stay and watch that night. So, I mean, it was just one of those things. I mean, I would just I would cry every Monday. I mean, it was bad enough Sunday night where, at 18:30, you're at formation, the weekend's over, you're like, oh my God, it's back to the grind. And then I go, oh my God, Monday's not any better. So.
Right. All right. Favorite Summer Olympic event?
The 400 hurdles.
Okay.
Men's and women's.
Right.
Oh, and then the 800, of course, but I do like the 400 hurdles the best.
Okay. All right. Any particular athlete that you follow there still or no?
Well, the first person that ever got me really interested was Edwin Moses.
Oh, for sure,
now I'm really dating myself, right? But he was amazing to watch, but right now, oh my gosh, Sydney McLaughlin and Dalilah Muhammad. Oh my gosh, to watch those two compete head to head against each other, it's the most amazing thing to watch. Technically, they're perfect. They feed off each other. Everyone's, one will win one time, one will win the next time. It's just amazing.
All right. Most memorable Olympic track and field moment that you recall watching on TV?
Well, I have two of these.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Again, dating myself is the Mary Decker Slaney versus Zola Budd in the 1984 Olympics in the 3,000 meters when there was a big buildup to this rivalry that I don't know was real or imagined, but and Zola Budd ran barefooted. They're on the track in Los Angeles. They're partway through the 3,000 meters. There's a lot of jostling, as I talked about earlier. And Zola Budd was kind of running out. She's still in lane 1, but like closer to the lane line between lane 1 and 2. And Mary Decker was on her shoulder, but trying to sneak in between her and the edge of the track, right? Mm-hmm. And then at some point, then Zola was trying to, they were sort of coming out of the turn, but she moved back in. Mary Decker, clipped her. They clipped a couple times, but they both recovered. But at this point, she clipped her again. If you look at the tape, Zola Budd barely kept running upright. But at that point, Mary Decker actually tripped up her, but she fell into the infield, and that was the end of the race. And then Zola Budd actually, dropped back. I don't know if she finished fourth. She definitely didn't win.
Yeah, she finished fourth or fifth. Yeah.
If you read about it, she said, there were so many boos. It was the U.S. and, she was South African running for England. And she said, I just didn't even want to try and win at that point because, it was just a bad situation for her. That's what she said. And the other one was just this past Olympics was, again, the 400 meters women's, Sydney McLaughlin and Dalilah Muhammad. And every time they ran, one of them set a world record.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And in fact, both of them actually beat the old world record. But since Sydney McLaughlin won, she's now the world record holder. But it's just, I couldn't run that fast, Carl, without hurdles. Actually, I'm not even sure I could bicycle that fast.
Really? Oh, that is so funny. I'll throw in one of my favorite moments here. And again, we're going back a little ways. We're going to go back. And by the way, I do remember that Zola Budd, Mary Decker race. Not only did I see it, but HBO Sports later on did a documentary called Picture Perfect. And it was a documentary on some of the more iconic sports photographs that were ever taken in the last, say, 50 years or so. And one of them was that one where they got Mary Decker on the side of the track, just in agony, basically, just probably partly because she was physically hurt, but probably more than the fact that she realized what just happened in terms of her Olympic dream and all that. Because you'll recall that she was actually a very, very strong runner in '84 still, but her year to win it all was 1980. And of course, they didn't compete in the Summer Olympics because of the boycott and everything. But, she still was the odds-on favorite to at least medal in '84. and didn't have a chance to do that. So that was one thing I do remember. But the one I'm thinking of for sure, I'm a big fan of the sprint relays. Okay, so in I believe it was the '88 Seoul Olympics, there was like the women's 4x100 meter relay, and I can't remember all the women who participated in that one except for the one who ran the anchor leg, which was Evelyn Ashford.
Oh,
And
right.
they were going against, of course, the East Germans who, I don't care what you're saying. I mean, I believe that every last one of those women were, getting some help, medically getting some help to compete. But I just remember that race was a complete toss up and nobody knew who was going to win. And the relays, both the men and the women, it seems like every couple Olympics, they always have these issues passing the baton, right? And in that particular one, as the final started off, the women were in really good shape. I mean, they were neck and neck with the East Germans the whole time. And then going into the last exchange, the East Germans were a little bit ahead. And when Evelyn Ashford took off to receive the baton, the exchange was not clean. I mean, she had it, but just barely. I mean, it was right by the very, very edge of it.
I remember
to the
that.
point where she didn't even bother switching hands. A lot of times you'll switch hands to put it in more comfortable. And you could just see her just like, they didn't even need to have the volume up. I mean, you could just tell the expletive that she muttered when she grabbed it, and then she just like took off. And then about halfway down the final stretch, it was almost like the East German runner just stopped running, and Evelyn Ashford just like blew past her and ended up winning by, I'd say, half a meter or so. But it was just the most incredible finish, and I will never forget that. I mean, there's times that I'll still pull it up on YouTube just to watch it. But yeah, that was pretty exciting. But all right, so all right. Well, I think you may have answered this question already, but I'll ask it anyway. Favorite Summer Olympic athlete?
Jackie Joyner-Kersee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, heptathlete, right?
Yep. And she was also she competed solely in the long jump also.
Right.
So she did the heptathlon and the long jump, did well in both. I think she won gold in both, actually.
Yep.
And just a great all-around athlete, great all-around person, just great.
Right.
So.
All right, good stuff. All right. Funniest thing you ever saw happen at a track meet, either in high school or at the academy?
I still tell this story. So we're at the Eastern Regionals outdoor meet, and it's in East Stroudsburg College in Pennsylvania. And we're in the stands, not very many people, and it's the 4x100. And we had four coaches. So Sheedy, Major Sheedy, I think he might have been a colonel by that point. But anyway, the sprint coach, it was a Navy lieutenant. I think he was a company officer, and unfortunately I can't remember his name. But he was a really great guy. And so we're sitting in the stands, right like midfield. And so we had the heats, and I ran the 4x the 400 meter hurdles. I didn't qualify for the finals, but our top runner, Stephanie Green, class of 85, did.
Mm-hmm.
But in her heat was also this other woman from some school, and Stephanie was good, but this woman left Stephanie in the dust. I mean, so we come up and we're sitting in the stands and we're talking. We're like, oh, it's okay, Steph. You'll get second. It'll be fine. It'll be great. And, just go out and do your best. And this lieutenant says, he goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe you people. He goes, you don't ever know what's going to happen. And we're like, what's going to happen, sir? And he's like, you don't know. It might rain. She might trip over the last hurdle. I'm like, yeah, right. Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah, right. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Go ahead. So we're, like I said, we're right like midfield, which is the 10th hurdle. And then there's, I don't know, maybe 15 yards between the 10th hurdle and the finish. And so the gun goes off and we're screaming for Steph and we're like, go Steph. And, and she's in second. And, so the 10th hurdle's in right front of us, and the girl trips over the last hurdle.
Oh my God.
And we're like, and we're just sitting there, stunned. And like, there was like this collective, And we're like, oh my gosh. And then we're like screaming for Stephanie. And like at that point, like it's like a split second. We see all this happen and we're screaming. We're like, go. She fell. Go. And she won. Stephanie Green won because the woman just couldn't recover quick enough off the fall. And then the lieutenant comes up to us again. He goes, see, you never know what's going to happen. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, she must have had like an angel or something or some devil or something on that hurdle because there's like, what was the likelihood of that happening? But I couldn't believe it. And to this day, I'll never forget that because it was just like, oh my gosh, she fell.
Unreal. That's a pretty good story. Okay, next question. The one teammate who pushed you to compete harder throughout the season.
Well, we were a very close-knit team. But I would have to say Stephanie Green, class of 85.
Okay.
I just the work ethic, just the nicest person, just a real team player, encouraged everyone. She never had, it was never about her. It was always about everyone else. She inspired a lot of people, but she was just she's a really great person. And she was, but I mean, early on, when I was a plebe, Lori Miklas, it was class of 81, kind of looked after me. And then, there was just so many others. Laura Hinckley, class of 83, great runner. Sue Honan, 84, we were pretty close. Becky, Becky was my roommate also for a while, but Ginger and Sue Honan, we're just really close. And the coaches themselves inspired everybody. Yeah. And I don't know if Ginger mentioned this in her thing about cross country, but they used to run with us. Mm-hmm. They used to do the workouts they didn't do the 6x100, 6x1 miles with us, but they used to run with us. And at the end of every season, they would, all the officers connected with the team, the O-Rep, and any coaches, they would put together a relay team, and we'd put together a relay team, and we'd race each other at the end of the season. So, that was just a great bunch of people to be associated with all these years.
All right, cool. Now, I do have one more question to ask, Chris. It's not on here, but it occurred to me. How closely are you following the programs these days, just out of curiosity?
I kind of keep tabs, but it's one is they don't have a lot of meets, and I actually it's been following cross country a little bit closer, mostly because they sometimes run down in the Tidewater area.
Right.
But I like to see how they're doing. Like, I look at it and I look at their times and I'm like going, oh my gosh, I wouldn't even be like, they'd run circles around me. I'd be still starting and they'd be finishing, and it's just so fast. I don't even know how I would get in at all anyway, anymore. So,
well, I was looking at some of their times as well and saying, okay, so by the time she's finishing, I'm about maybe a third of the way through my whatever I'm doing. And by the time I finish, she's probably on her second recovery drink.
Oh, no. Yeah, Carl, when you mentioned one time you were going to do a perimeter run during one of our reunions.
Yeah, it was the last one, yeah.
And you said, oh, we're going to do 8-minute, 40-second miles. And I think it was raining that day or cold or something. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I can't do that anymore. I don't want to be embarrassed. So I'm just going to sit this one out. So I'm sure Ginger was there.
Ginger was there. Yeah. That's pretty funny. But my question is this, actually, and it kind of goes along the lines of what you just mentioned in terms of the athletes that are there now, and recognizing that when you were there, you and Ginger and Sue and anybody else who ran during that time essentially were responsible for getting that program up and running. Okay, starting off in division, I guess 2, and then eventually it migrated to Division One. I don't think you guys even competed against Army until after we graduated. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how things and that rivalry's been pretty close. But my question to you, this last question is, as you look at the program in terms of how it's evolved, and I've mentioned that the women have already won multiple Patriot League championships and so forth. When you think about the fact that, okay, yeah, I was one of the folks who kind of helped get things up and running, just can you explain to me how that makes you feel inside when you see how some of these programs, cross country, indoor track and outdoor track, how far they've come? And, quite frankly, when it comes to the Patriot League and Navy athletics, the women's sports are doing extremely well right now. And just trying to get a sense for how that makes you feel, knowing that you were one of the original athletes that kind of got things going.
I'm just so proud of having been a part of it at the beginning. And I'm just so proud of them now and how strong they are in multi-disciplines, leadership. I'm so happy that they're doing well academically. They're part of, very integrated into the brigade. It's I'm sure there's still issues, but, overall, there's so many more women that it's just, I'm sure the experience isn't what it was when we were there. It's not, I don't want to disparage anything. I mean, it was obviously it was difficult, but everybody has a difficult time for whatever reason. You had your difficulties. I had mine. They weren't the same per se, but I think now the attitude there is so different that it's not the, I don't want to say the old boys network because that's not it, but there was just so much tradition. I mean, one of my company mates, John Sylvester, I mean, his family legacy at Navy went back like 4 generations. Mm-hmm. And so you're not now, if you go back a couple generations, sometimes some of these mids, their mom went there. Yeah. Which is, the whole attitude now is different and they're more accepting. But I'm just so proud to have been a part to just even put a crack in the glass ceiling, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But I think the women now, thankfully, due to both their parents, are more self-confident, and they're just they just know that they have a place there too. Right. And it's not about who you are, outside appearances. It's who you are character-wise, and your dedication to excellence in whatever, leadership in your athletics and your academics. I just think I'm very proud of all the midshipmen, but I am especially proud of the women and how far we've come over 40 years now of being there. Right.
I totally agree with you. And by all indications, it's not stopping anytime soon. I just spoke with our classmates, the late Steve Skinner's daughter, Sarah, in our last podcast. And I mean, she's just an unbelievable talent, both academically, obviously being the 54th Rhodes Scholar, but also athletically as well in terms of what she did with Navy women's rugby. So yeah, I totally get all of that. All right. Well, listen, Chris, that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thanks so much for being with us. I had a great time getting caught up with you, and really, really appreciate you being on the program. So thanks a lot.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Carl. It's always great. I'm glad what you're doing, and hopefully I'll fly with your wife again soon.
All right. All right. Awesome. You take care now.
Thanks, Carl.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. That was a lot of fun. By the way, that last reference there that Chris made regarding my wife, I just found this out actually when we got reconnected, but my wife is a flight attendant for United Airlines, and she and Chris started within 2 months of each other. I think my wife's start date was July of 91, and I think you heard Chris say that she joined United as a pilot there in May of 91. So small world. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back to wrap things up with one key performance that I wanted to mention from the Wesley A. Brown Invitational that was held last week in Annapolis. So we'll be right back. Okay, thanks for hanging with us here on Navy Sports Central as we head down the home stretch. Before I forget, I did want to clarify one thing that Chris said earlier, and it was when she was answering that question, that first lightning round question, and she mentioned the phrase 6N day. Now, if you're a grad or you have a son or daughter at the academy now, you know that 6N day refers to a full day of classes with no free periods. And there's nothing worse than having one of those on a Monday. So that was one of the reasons I was laughing so hard, because I hadn't heard the term in such a long time. Anyway, I did want to pass along one terrific accomplishment by one of the athletes we just discussed, and this took place at the Wesley A. Brown Invitational last weekend. Katie Halbert, who was our featured multi-event athlete for this episode, she tied the school record for points in the pentathlon with 3,709. But even more impressive was the fact that she also set new school records in the 60-meter hurdles and the long jump. And she did all that in the space of about 5 hours. In fact, after the meet, Coach Cook mentioned that he had never seen an athlete put together that kind of a performance in such a short period of time. So congratulations to Katie, and good luck in the star meet coming up this weekend against Army. Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to call an audible here, and we're going to pick back up with the question of the day and our mid-watch segment in our next episode. So that's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. Once again, I'd like to thank my classmate and Navy Athletic Sports Hall of Famer Chris Gromick for helping me preview the women's indoor track team. It was really good to get her perspective today. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page. I will go ahead and pin it to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.